Well, good afternoon, everybody. Doug Fowler here from Pulaski County Talks. We're just going to get started here in a little bit, but I want to shout out to the sponsors first, the Eclectic Originals. You see their ad right there, right down there in Waynesville. Let me change my scene there. Oh, let me mute that. I always forget that. There, mute, I said. Somebody's online laughing at me, I'm sure. But anyway, we want to thanks to Eclectic Originals down there in Waynesville for sponsoring the part of the show, co-sponsoring the show. Also want to thank out the A2Z Exterminating LLC. They're a sponsor of the show as well today. And of course, shout out to Prue Law and the Prue Law office down there in Waynesville. But who I got with me today is JB King, retired sheriff, book author, retired state trooper. And without further ado, let me turn your camera on. I'm in the wrong place. There we go. Too many buttons. Now we're live, I think. It'll come on live, but we are live right now. Welcome, JB. I appreciate you being here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come down here. You know, we're not a hostile audience, that's for sure. But
Well, I'm kind of glad you put me in this chair because I watched a couple of the episodes. The guy sitting on the couch back here looked awfully comfortable, like I could go to sleep. Okay, so the hardback chair is probably going to be a lot better.
Well, it probably is a little bit, but we want to thank you, and the sponsors want to thank you, especially the Eclectic Originals. They sponsor, key sponsor of the show. So, and I want to say thanks to everybody down there. So, let's go over how many 52 years.
52.
52 years in law enforcement. God, I can't even fathom that. That's, I
And
mean,
all of it here in Pulaski.
every single day. And that was a state trooper too. Use our state trooper.
I was one of the 8 we had here. Yes.
Wow, 52 years. So what? I read your biography, and you're an Army brat.
Correct.
Your dad was Air Force.
No, Army.
Army. Okay, I just said that. Yeah. And you grew up here.
I grew up in Salem. Graduated high school there, and then went to college at School of the Ozarks down at Branson. It's now known as College of the Ozarks.
Right.
It'll always be SFO.
When you look way back on your career, over 52 years ago, what got you into thinking law enforcement was the thing to do?
Fate is probably the best answer. As a college senior, I was a member of the School of the Ozarks Volunteer Fire Department.
Right.
And I guess my actions down there impressed a retiree who was working part time for the school, who just happened to be a retired state trooper. And he began telling me, "You need to apply for the state patrol." I had read their qualifications and the stuff they were looking for. And going into the recruiting cycle they were doing, I was going to be a fresh out of college graduate,
Right.
who had one minor high school summer job. So I had almost zero work record. So I was pretty sure they weren't going to take me. And,
Sure.
this got him off my back. And next thing I know, I get the telegram, "You've been accepted. Will you report?" Ooh, yes, I guess I will. Because, the job sounded interesting. And
Well, sure.
boy, that's the understatement of the year. It turned out to be fascinating, interesting, and about 47 other words, some of which I can't repeat
Oh
here.
yeah. Well, you could. It bleep out automatically. I tell you what. Now, first off, you're a state trooper.
Correct.
Uh, what are some of your key experiences that you can recall? If somebody's to ask you, what do you remember most about being a state trooper? How many years was it?
32.
32 years of state trooper. There's probably 1,000 things that you remember.
There's no way I can answer that
Yeah.
question. There's simply too many. It, as an example, for if I the motorcycle, it's almost scary some days how many places in the county I've been, and something happened right
Right.
here, and lots of memories, and many of which I just as soon not
I
have.
understand that for sure.
So being a state trooper gave you a lot of skills that would come in handy Uh, you learn developed investigative skills, which
Hmm.
doesn't hurt later on. You as you rise in rank in the patrol, you can't treat every trooper the same. Well, the
Right.
same thing applies later on. What works for one guy will not work for the next one, and so to be an effective leader, you have to manage those situations and do a good job. And so those are some of the things the patrol drills into you. I became a field training officer, and they put us through a special class for that. And when you get right down to it, being a field training officer is an awesome responsibility because so often that rookie officer coming out of the academy modifies and molds his behavior on the
Hmm.
traits that you put into him. Um, so I always looked at the FTO position as I'm training a guy who's going to be around for the next 25 years. So I better put some priority into this. And oh,
Sure.
by the way, a year from now, if I'm in deep stuff, he may be the guy coming to back me up and save me. So he better know what he's doing when he gets there. So
And
I better do a good
yeah,
job.
because he's only going to know what you teach him.
I better do a good job.
Now, transitioning to the sheriff's department, I mean, you had what we call a wealth of tools that you brought into the sheriff's department that you were able to use as a trooper.
Yes, but, and there's a big but in there. The job of a state trooper and the job of a sheriff is literally two different worlds.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yes, some of the leadership, the personnel management, the investigative skills, all of that will have a bearing on how you can operate as a sheriff. But your duties as a sheriff are so different from that of a trooper that it's almost beyond comprehension some days. You have to push paper big time as the sheriff. You have to do budgets. You have to go in front of the commissioners to justify your budget, to ask them to implement some new plan. You see a need for something and you have to talk to them about, well, we need a new generator for the courthouse because the one we've got now won't even power the jail, much less the courthouse.
Right. Right.
And you have to fight battles like that. Well, when you're fighting battles like that, you're not out on the road responding to crimes and incidents. But at the same time, when you've only got two, maybe three guys on the road and they're all tied up, when that next call comes in, there's only one person left, and that's you.
Holding
So,
the line.
so whether you like it or not, you go handle a call.
Right.
Okay, now you've got investigative paperwork to do, reports, and that's taking you away from your other job. I know we were joking before we went live, but one of my most frequent complaints was a citizen would say, I came down to the office to see you and you weren't there. You were out on some call somewhere. And the next guy through the door would say, why didn't you show up at my call? They said you were down here hiding in the office and you should have been at my burglary supervising. It's a no-win situation.
And especially when there's only one or two deputies out there on the road. And then we talked a little bit about the priorities according to law. What was the top priority?
The top priority by state statute for the sheriff is he shall, and I repeat,
I
shall
love that word.
support the court.
Yeah.
And that means whatever the judges need done is your first priority.
Yeah.
If you have one deputy on duty and the judge has a hearing and an inmate needs to be transported from the Miller County Jail,
Right.
we didn't have the big jail back when I was the sheriff. The lone deputy went to the Miller County Jail, got that inmate and brought him back instead of going to your burglary and working your burglary.
Right.
And a lot of citizens got mad over that point, but it's the way the statute reads. The sheriff
Right.
shall support the court. The second one is the sheriff shall run the jail. And then third, the sheriff may respond to criminal affrays and situations and, law
Sure.
enforcement. But it's your number three. It's that simple.
And that's hard. I can imagine how hard that is for some people to really grasp that the importance of that prioritization in your decision-making process as a sheriff.
Well, the balancing act, you always tried to get the prisoner transports done is the most efficient way you could. I took some flack one time because one of my deputies was living in Vienna,
Mm-hmm.
driving a patrol car back and forth. And, that's wasted gas mileage. My tax money's going down the drain. Wait a second, guys. He stops by the Phelps County Jail and brings inmates down almost every day. And on his way home, he drops one off at the Phelps County Jail because we don't have room here. We have to have inmates elsewhere. And so I call it an efficient use of resources.
Right.
And if he's taking the inmate home as his shift is ending,
You're right.
that's really not a drain on his ability to work during the day. He can't stay on the air forever. He's got to go home sooner or later. Well, drop the inmate off on the way home. I thought it was a wise management.
It sounds
Run to a car and go on a really hot call instead of the guy coming out of Dixon or out of Waynesville. So you have to use your brain and think
Sure.
and have a priority and try to come up with, I hate to use the word think outside the box,
Mm-hmm.
responses, but yeah, think outside the box.
Absolutely, because no problem's the same.
No problem's the same.
Hey, we got our first comment. Richard Osnick. I happen to know this guy. He's from Alaska. He's watching right now. He goes, what difference do you see in a prosecuting attorneys now as to what you experienced in your time? The difference between now and then, what you're experiencing with the prosecuting attorneys.
Ooh. Well, I'm going to have to qualify that one by saying for the last, well, no, I can't say that either. I did do PC statements. The mandatory statements of probable cause that now are required to support a criminal case created an extra burden for the officers. If you do not have a really good PC statement,
Mm-hmm.
the prosecutor has problems with filing those cases, or he may file a case of a lower class than what you were asking for because your PC statement wasn't up to par. So I would say that the professionalism of the prosecutor has had to ramp up over the last several years or last decade, let's call it that, compared to the past. And it's a full-time job now that
Sure.
used to be a part-time. So it is a lot more demanding. We have a lot of cases here.
Oh, I can imagine. He's got a staff up there. He's got
Yes.
assistant prosecutors. And the way I imagine a PC statement, that's the beginning step of a case. And if it's the foundation or the cornerstone of the case.
Right. You're laying the basement and the house is going to have to fit over it. And there's the additional burden that the minute he files that criminal case, your PC statement is a public record. So the facts
Yeah.
are out there if they want to publish them.
Now, I get most of my knowledge from watching Cops. That's my exercise too. Watching Cops and watching The Wire, and in those TV shows, they just stress the importance of writing your PCs right.
Well, excuse me. The TV reality is a little different from the real world.
Oh, sure.
If let's say a homicide, you arrive on a homicide scene and you're investigating it, the first couple of hours in a homicide investigation like that, the paperwork alone is going to take you 60 minutes. You convicted him. It's not the way it works in the real world.
I believe it, because you got lawyers or defense attorneys right across the street is going to be picking holes.
Oh yeah,
that's their job,
and that's their job.
Yeah.
That's what they get paid to do.
Yeah.
That you're entitled to.
Absolutely.
And my own personal philosophy on that is simple: you charge the correct person. If you don't, and you convict an innocent person, number one, you've convicted an innocent person, which I think would be an insult.
Right.
And number two, the guy who actually did the crime is out there somewhere laughing his can off at you.
Right.
And I don't like either one of those thoughts. So
no shortcuts.
Always tried to make sure we crossed every T and dotted all the I's and had all the stuff in. It leads to cases where you can't show the burden of proof enough to have the higher class
Right.
of crime, but enough to prove the lower class.
Right.
We had a case one time where we had a young child that was killed.
Oh, wow.
We charged the defendant with child abuse in the first degree, and everybody's screaming, "Why didn't you charge him with murder?" Well, it's like this. For murder, you have to prove premeditation. for child abuse in the first degree, you only have to prove that he actually killed the child. The penalties are identical.
Oh, wow.
20 years to life.
Same as murder.
Same as murder. So the job of a PA is not easy because the nitpicking, we had one case that took 6 years to get the defendant in front of a jury.
6 years.
6 years.
I would think the prosecutor and the sheriff are just like, they're working hip to hip.
Yes.
That's what you'd have to have a great relationship.
I'm not down at
One of my instructors in college, so I respect that man.
Yep, I do too.
Now, we're talking big picture now. Everything in 50 years, 52 years you've learned. What are the most pressing issues facing law enforcement today, in your opinion?
Well, the cycle of law enforcement is the way I'm going to answer that one. Back in the early 70s, maybe I should say officers became more. Now we've been in the other end of the pendulum. Officers are, they didn't de-escalate. They sat on the guy and he died of asphyxiation, and they screwed that one up, and
right.
All that stuff. Well, the pendulum, I think, is starting to change again, and I'm noticing more positive remarks here and there. And even though I'm not really active in law enforcement, I'm preparing the applications for a trooper's job in California from January of 2022 to January of 2024. And this is California now,
right?
The anti-police state. Their applications were up 94%.
Holy smokes!
So I'm sensing everything is changing. The Oregon, they had a very restrictive pursuit policy to the point where I don't think I'd have started a pursuit if I knew the guy was a murderer and was shooting out the window. But now all of a sudden, I think they passed a new one, and now it's reasonable suspicion, and you can pursue.
And I think they overturned the decriminalization. I thought I read somewhere.
And they're working on the decriminalization of drugs, so
yeah,
they're trying to overturn that one. So the pendulum, I believe, is swinging, and that's one of the biggest problems right now, because over the last couple of years, it has been so prevalent that it's anti-cop.
Yeah.
That departments everywhere are shorthanded. I'm trying to remember what Chicago put out the other day. Chicago PD was down, 13% on their officers.
Wow.
I think it was 13. I may be wrong on that one.
That's probably a big force, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
New York City at one point, I think, had 35,000 New York City police officers. That's a small army.
That's an Army Corps.
But look at how much territory they have to cover. So the bottom line is, if you want good law enforcement, you have to have good people.
Yeah.
And to get good people, you have to pay good money. So right now, low morale, lack of applicants, and low pay is probably the biggest issues facing, the Highway Patrol, Missouri State Highway Patrol. I think they announced the other day they're down 103 troopers statewide.
Wow.
When I applied back in 1969, there were 22 openings that they were going to do in that particular academy class, and we had almost 5,000 applicants.
5,000.
So when I read that statistic, and boom, I'm one of the 22.
Wow.
So, yes.
The local towns are hiring.
Yes.
And I brought it up to Brian, I think Brian Gibbs or Nick Pappas, it always concerns me is the cherry picking, St. Robert cherry picks from the sheriff cherry picks, but he said that's not really an issue because they're pretty competitive bonds for, I think, on pay anymore.
Yeah. Well, when I was sheriff, it was an issue because I lost many deputies to departments that paid 30 to 40% more than I could. And I lost them to private industry, particularly Fort Leonard Wood, for jobs out there. The only saving grace I had was probably 90% of the people I lost to Fort Wood continued as a reserve and gave me work for free when they could. So, yeah, it's a downer in one respect. But on the other hand, if you still keep them as a reserve, you do get some work. So it's not exactly a total loss.
Right.
World-class investigator. And he was my federal liaison officer. Any
Really?
case that involved the feds, he was the guy that did the liaison work between us and the feds, and we kept him busy. Of course, we weren't publicizing a lot of those cases, but
Sure.
that's another story. Uh, so you have to have a good reserve force, and that's getting tighter because more and more people with the economy morale. Why do you want to be a cop? Everybody's down on cops.
Exactly. I of all the jobs out there, there's one that should be, maybe teachers and cops should be the most respected jobs out there. And growing up, you want the best you can get, and when you're going on the downside, you don't need a cop until you need a cop.
Right. And then when you get that cop, you want the smartest, most intelligent, most knowledgeable guy you can find because it's your property that's
That's right.
missing or your loved one that got murdered and you want justice and you want it, but you also are going to have to pay to get that smart, intelligent, dedicated guy.
Absolutely.
So, it's a vicious cycle.
I mean, I can see the competition, probably cutthroat competition. Probably, I don't know if it's the same way, but probably
I
dealing with Springfield or St. Louis, the bigger cities.
Well, that one I can't answer
Okay.
because the majority of my troops went to smaller departments like Springfield PD, other sheriff's departments that paid more.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them went to federal law enforcement out on the base.
Right.
So the competition was fierce.
Yeah.
Now things are a little bit better. Salaries are up. Not quite as bad, but on the other hand, salaries are not keeping up with the rest of the world. So
Right.
that's one I'm not really prepared to talk about
Sure,
because
sure.
I'm not in the exact knowledge right now.
Well, that's fine. That's great. But I agree with you. They're better than what they were.
Yeah. Well, I've been out of the active business for 12 years now. Let's see, no. Yeah, 12 years. Um, I made a vow to myself when I left office as the elected sheriff that I was going to fade back into the corner, keep my mouth shut. I'm not the guy running the circus anymore. It's not my stuff, and I don't want to get quoted as saying, "Well, JB said this," and
Oh,
I
sure.
don't want to be wrong. So, if you're not up on it on a routine basis, you're probably better off being quiet. And so that's the approach I'm taking.
That's nothing wrong with that. Now we're going to segue. 52 years law enforcement plus to an author. Where did that pivot say you wanted to start writing books? What was the pinnacle or the tipping point?
Well, actually, I'm going to throw you a curveball. I started writing my senior year in college.
Did you really?
I had 4 magazine articles published before I had my application into the patrol.
Really?
It's a convoluted story, and it starts out by saying that my junior year in college, it suddenly dawned on me one day, do I have enough credit hours to graduate? And with my diploma, considering what I'm taking this year and what I've already got scheduled to take my senior year.
Mm-hmm.
So I checked. Short 4 hours of fine arts, which meant English. Well, I personally hate English classes. Forget it. So I got to looking at the curriculum, and there was a class titled journalism that counted for 4 hours of fine arts.
Oh, there you go.
So I signed up for it. And the professor in that particular class had an out and out challenge. He said right off the bat, I'm going to assign you a major story to write every week on a topic that I pick. And if you take any of those stories and get them published in a reputable newspaper or magazine,
Right.
you get an automatic A for the course.
I'll be damned.
Well, at the time, I was part of the school's fire department. And so a couple of weeks later, the question was, what situation here at the School of the Ozarks has influenced you the most? So I took that as an opportunity to write an article about the school's fire department. Got a good grade on the article, and to show him I was serious, I modified it a little bit, and I sent it unsolicited to Fire Engineering Magazine, which at that time was probably the premier,
Right.
publication in the firefighting field. They dealt with articles about Detroit PD or Detroit Fire Department, New York City's ladder trucks, the problems they had with the skyscraper. They had big city stuff. They weren't going to take mine.
Right.
Wrong answer. About 3 weeks later, I get a letter back. We have accepted your story and it'll be in the January issue. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, here comes the we've changed our mind letter. I open it up and there's a check for $100 in there.
I'll be daggone.
Well, now, starving college kid back in those days, $100. Oh, wait a minute. So there was a second 4-hour course of journalism offered, same guy. So I took it, same challenge, and I had 3 magazine articles published in that class on topics that he gave us. So when the smoke cleared, I had 8 hours of 4.0 average and $175. And I thought, I like this racket. So I kept writing.
Wow. So, and when was your first book?
My first book, I started working on it in 1980.
Okay.
I had a chance encounter with a Missouri Highway Department employee. He was telling me about a buried treasure that had been found here in Pulaski County, and buried treasure tales. Yeah, I looked him in the eye and said, BS. Well, he came back a couple of days later with a handful of coins and said, see these coins? They came from that treasure. And more importantly, he gave me the rough time frame that it was found. And I went down to the Pulaski County Democrat morgue files and pulled up the old newspapers. And lo and behold, I was hoping they had a little blurb on it. Front page story. They had a reporter on the scene.
Really?
And he was naming people. Oh, there goes Joe Jones and there's Tom Henry. And he named a couple of people I knew. And so I looked them up and said, tell me about this. And the research race was on.
Really?
When the smoke cleared, I had a file cabinet full of information. And I had always wanted to do a book. And I thought, if I do some Civil War research to add to the story of this treasure and the Tilley family, you got enough info for a book, big boy. So I started a frantic 12-month research project into the Civil War and then combined them all together and came out with the Tilley treasure.
I'll be daggone.
I accomplished my book, my dream.
Right.
I wrote a book.
How many do you have now?
5.
Wasn't the one was about the murder on Post? I remember hearing about that. I haven't been in that long, but what was that about?
Well, in January of 1977, an on-duty member of the 463rd MP Company, who was assigned to the game warden detail, stopped a car with 4 civilian kids driving across Post on a double date. And basically, he kidnapped them for the purpose of rape. And before the night was over, he shot and killed 3 of them and wounded the 4th. He buried them all in the snowbank and drove off.
Wow.
Unfortunately for him, the surviving girl dug her way out of the snowbank, walked off base to a house. And you have to understand that she walked through 6 inches of snow and the temperature was in the teens with north wind blowing. So by the time she gets to the house, she's suffering from hypothermia. She's not making a whole lot of sense. But the homeowner, the lady who was there, realized she's soaking wet. So, she needs fresh clothing. So they're changing clothes, and the homeowner sees 2 bullet wounds.
Oh,
and
wow.
the next thing I know, the highway patrol is sending me south on 17 to check on the runaways, but one of them's been shot.
You were the sheriff at the time.
No, highway patrol.
Highway patrol. Good,
Yeah.
good, gotcha.
So I go down to check on these runaways, and I walk into a triple murder by a federal cop that I'm totally not expecting. And boy, you talk about a day going downhill in a hurry. That one tanked out at the bottom in about 30 seconds.
Wow. That's all in your book, too.
It's all in the book.
On the book. Wow, that's amazing. Because I remember hearing about it. Wasn't there a robbery of the club?
Soto Service Club?
Yeah.
Well, which one?
Well, I
There's
don't know.
There's 2.
Okay.
The one in 1968 ended with a triple murder in Devil's Elbow.
That's the one I remember hearing
Yep.
about.
Well, the Soto Club got hit years later, and one guy was killed, and that one ended up with a federal conviction for 2 people.
Wow.
But that was, oh Lord, 2002.
Yeah, that wasn't that long ago.
That wasn't that long ago.
Excuse me.
I wasn't sheriff at the time, so
Yeah.
it wasn't my case, but I can't remember the date. But yeah, there's 2 different Soto. My cold case detective crew took a hard run at the Devil's Elbow case, and we presented it to the prosecutor, and he told us, you've convinced me who did it, but unfortunately there's evidence gaps missing here where we can't get the evidence in because the people have passed and
Right.
there's no backup. There's no way we're going to convict. And basically I knew that before we submitted it to him, but thought we might as well try.
Right. Now, money couldn't be your only motivation.
I'm sorry, what?
Money probably wasn't your only motivation for writing, because that's a lot of work.
Oh, no. My writing career, or whatever you want to call it, is strictly a hobby.
Right.
I did it for fun and enjoyment. And now that I'm retired, the best advice I got before I retired was, when you're retired, you got a lot of free time. Don't sit in front of the TV and drink beer. It'll kill you. Whatever it is you like to do, go do. If you
Right.
want to fish, go hunt, play golf, do bowling tournaments, whatever it is you do, do it. Don't sit on your butt at the
Yeah.
house. So that's been my motto, and I enjoy researching. I particularly like finding some obscure person you never heard of that's got an interesting story and writing that up. I've had numerous magazine articles and 5 books now.
Oh, somebody's here. Let me I forgot to shut off my cameras. For those that don't know, I'm wired for sound here at the house.
His machine gun covers the front yard. Don't try to break in.
There ain't nobody sneaking up on us here.
And the cat'll get you too.
We got 2 of them, and they're not declawed. Now, the research of writing always concerned me. I'd rather do fiction, but I think there's a lot of research in that too. But for those that want to start writing, what would you say is a key motivator, something like a tidbit of knowledge to get somebody started over the...
There's a guy to talk to if you want fiction. He's got a vivid imagination, and you've already interviewed him. I don't do fiction. My stuff is all true facts.
Right.
And so for that, you have to do research. My first book, The Tilley Treasure, has been a really big hit in the county. And it's not because I'm a great writer. It's because of a research.
Right.
At the time I did The Tilley Treasure, nobody had ever tapped into the the federal resources like the National Archives.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get quite a bit of material from the archives and a book system, the official record of the rebellion.
Right.
And putting all of that together, I had information in my book people in this county had never heard of or dreamed of. And so besides the fact that it was the true story of an actual buried treasure,
Right.
you have all this true stuff. And being sneaky, I named every person I could find with a name back then because guess who still has descendants in this county? I'll even tell you one story. I was pretty well done with the book, had it written. I was in the process of rewriting it. And a friend of mine, Joe Morgan, tapped me on the shoulder and said, I got to tell you about this funny story. And, he was talking to some of his buddies working out on post at facilities engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started this book, I had questioned his dad, who was still alive at the time. He was 84, because he sat on the lap of guys who were actually living here in the Civil War and listened to their stories. And one of them was a relative that, by the name of Wilson Leroy Tilley, that I knew had been arrested by Union forces and charged and was convicted in a Union Army tribunal and sentenced to the pen. And I didn't let on that I knew that. I kept asking stories. Well, what happened to Wilson? And old Joe just, he didn't know, he didn't know anything. Well, I finally let him know, it finally dawned on me that before the book came out, I better go, let him know for sure because they were friends.
Sure.
So I said, okay, Joe, here's the deal. I've got the transcript. I know he was sent to the pen. And the old guy goes, I recollect something about that now. And so he told me the family side of it, which is also in the book now. So Joe was laughing about it out on post, and one of his buddies said, my great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War here. You think your writer friend could find anything about him? So I get the name and I start looking, and the first thing I find is that this guy is a lieutenant. Wait a minute. The Union Army is recruiting regiments of black troops to fight, and they throw away a perfectly good white have information. Camp and his colonel had a hissy fit because he had ordered that no prisoners were to be brought in. They were to be shot in the field. He jumped all over the lieutenant. The lieutenant takes the prisoners out at midnight, marches them up the road, and boom, boom.
Wow.
Well, somebody gets the word to the commanding officer of the district of Rolla, at Rolla, and he sends down a major to investigate. And this major interviews everybody involved, and I get a copy of all these statements.
Really?
So I have to. Book's now ready to go again. I tell young Joe about what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes back to his buddy on post and basically looks him in the eye and says, "If you think the skeleton in my closet was bad, wait till you read about yours."
Don't dig too deep. You may not know what you're going to find.
And as a result, I sold quite.
PA format and having every little thing, because especially with nonfiction, you got to have it all.
Well, I cheated.
Okay.
I gathered a group of friends and we had a party. And I went through the book page by page. Okay, Appleberry, Joe. And each person had 4 or 5 letters of the alphabet.
Right.
And they would write down their person and the page number he was on. And over the course of about 4 hours, we compiled a bibliography.
Wow.
And then, well, the official record of the rebellion is 128 books. Each one's about 1,000 pages, small print, and every reinforces, but it's in there. And since this is prior to the internet, I found myself out at the Bruce Clark Library on Post, where they have 2 complete sets of the record of rebellion. One set being under lock and key you couldn't get to at the time, the other one on the shelf. So to start with, you have to know that if you're looking in the official record of the rebellion for stuff regarding Missouri, you have to look for the volume that says Operations in the Trans-Mississippi States. Don't ask me why they did it that way, but that's the book you want. And so I took every one of those books and went through them page by page, scanning, looking strictly for Missouri stuff. So I read a ton of information about Missouri, but I was keying in on stuff for Pulaski County and to some degree Phelps County and Laclede County, because at the start of the Civil War, Rolla was a critical asset for the Union Army. It was the end of the railroad. Right. They could ship military supplies into Rolla by the thousands of tons, literally, just drop of a hat. But from there, it had to go by wagon train to all the outposts we had all over this country. And we had wagon trains up to 900 wagons long.
Right.
Being escorted by Union cavalry leaving Rolla. So it's a vast adventure.
Wow.
And so, the more information I put in the book, the better it was.
Sure, absolutely. I read Grant's book, and I found that I was really impressed with that. The detail to which that he wrote and stuff like that, and I found it very interesting. And I read John Adams' biography, and the way they write's completely different too.
And for example, I get several trial transcripts from the National Archives. These were handwritten trial transcripts. And it took a while to realize they probably were written by a clerk who spoke German or had a German background, because they had one routine. I couldn't figure out what it was until I finally got enough repetitions that I knew the word had to be Missouri. But it had this really weird double F that threw me completely off.
That's amazing to think the kind of, what person was writing that literally by hand.
Literally by hand, yes. But it's a word-by-word account of the trial. And in fact, I put Wilson Tilley's trial in the Tilley Treasure word for word, and basically said, I challenge you to come up with the same verdict that the board did. Now, you have to understand that the tribunals they did, the civil system of courts around here collapsed. For example, here in Pulaski in 1862, the elected sheriff of Pulaski County, Union Army stepped in to be the courts, the executioner, the whole bit.
Martial law, so to speak.
Martial law. And if you were a Southern sympathizer charged with something, you went in front of a impartial board of 7 Union Army officers who
Yeah.
decided your fate. And, I thought, boy, that's a neat kangaroo court system.
Oh, no kidding.
But as I started doing research, I started finding cases where the Union Tribunal actually acquitted the guy.
Really?
And one of them that to me was, I forget what the charge was. It wasn't that major, but the defendants literally told the court, yeah, I did it. And if I get out of here, I'm going to do it again. And they acquitted him. Totally destroyed my notion of kangaroo court. I mean, come on. The guy said he's going to do it again and not guilty.
And then he did it.
Not guilty.
Wow.
Now, whether he did it again or not, I don't know. But
No.
I mean, it's a different time frame. But the military tribunal's been around forever. We used it in World War II for Nazi saboteurs that were, they were brought over by submarine and dumped off on our Atlantic side coast, and were to infiltrate into plants and
right.
defense facilities and cause all kinds of sabotage and havoc. Well, it's not something you're going to read about unless you start digging.
Sometimes you got to dig.
You got to dig.
Wow. Now, segueing, we got an election going on. I know you're out of politics,
Uh-huh.
but if there's one tidbit of knowledge you'd like to bestow upon whoever's going to win that election as sheriff, what would you like to bestow upon them?
Ooh, now that's a tough question, Doug.
You can take all the time you want, but
Well, I'm not sure how to answer it, but your mastery of the budget and how it interplays with the rest of the county's budget. And there's one called the Inmate Security Fund.
right.
Inmates are booked into the jail. There's a fee attached to the court fees that go with that case. I believe it's $2 goes to the Inmate Security Fund. The Inmate Security Fund, by law, for the first purchase, which occurred during my term, was the first purchase had to be a biometric identification system for the jail. Well, I got lucky. I won a grant, $25,000 for an APHIS fingerprint machine.
Wow.
And that became the biometric system. And we had about 20,000 in the account. So that took care of the yearly maintenance fee for the next 17 years is the way I calculated it.
Right.
Average number of inmates coming in plus $2 plus what's left here minus the yearly fee. And I came up with it's going to last for 17 years. Well, the very next year, the commissioners stripped that line because the secondary factor was once you've bought the biometric identification system, that fund can be used for any jail expense. So they put the routine expenses, the toilet paper, the cleaning stuff,
Wow.
And so the 17 years worth of, no hassle with this machine.
Sure.
And you had to have it because it crashed one time. The main computer component, which I'm not smart enough to explain to you, failed and it had to be replaced. And they told me that single unit cost $15,000.
Good googly moogly.
And we had the warranty, so it was free.
Oh,
So you have to know your budget, the interplay. There are other funds and interplays in the courthouse. You have to know virtually every elected office down there has one or two funds by state law attached to them.
right.
The circuit clerk, for example, has a passport
Right.
fund, and there's certain things she can use it for, certain things she can't.
Yeah.
So you have to understand all those because some team, when I first started it up, because she could do it from a particular fund because it was courthouse security, which is under her
Right.
bailiwick, so to speak. So no publicity. She helped buy stuff for my SWAT team.
It's appropriate use of funds.
Appropriate use of funds all the way.
My experience in funding is that we call it fenced. It's kind of like an appropriation from the federal government. The Congress allows you to use it for this much and this purpose alone, and anything outside of that purpose, bad.
It's basically the same way with state
That's
law.
why I thought so too.
Every one of the elected offices down there has some kind of a particular
Yeah.
fund that is dedicated to that office that can only be used for certain things. And you need to know that.
Yeah.
You know, actually, that makes the job of the presiding commissioner a nightmare because he's got to know all these things
All across it.
as soon as he takes office. Well, you don't find out about these things by accident. You have to do some digging.
That's called partnerships.
Yeah, partnerships.
Yeah.
And you have to be aware of those. You have to be able to, again, recruit people. You
Mhm.
have to be able to keep people after you've recruited them. You got to be able to supply them. What's the trend? What's coming up next? What should you have equipment wise? And we're going to go back to that routine. Well, the citizen says, I came down to the office to see you and you weren't there. You were out on some case. And the next guy comes in. Well, you were in the office and you should have been out at my house. I had a burglary, lost all my Hot Wheel toys or whatever. And there's going to be negative publicity no matter what
Sure.
you do. If you can't deal with that, you better have a thick hide to be a sheriff.
Paperwork.
Paperwork, tons.
You better have your writing skills and your typing skills.
Better have your writing skills, your typing skills, and it comes from a lot of different ways. I'm not sure how much the federal 1033 program goes anymore, but we got all kinds of, it wasn't working and took me forever to get it back, without sleep.
Right.
I hate to admit this, but my first year in office, 2005, I remember very little of that year.
Really?
I total exhaustion the entire year.
Wow.
So people will ask me about events from 2005 and
Kind of like you better be able to answer to yourself, why do you want this job?
why do I want this job?
Okay.
Now, don't misunderstand me. It's a fascinating job. Very interesting. Never boring. The only drawback, well, okay, there's several drawbacks, but I think the major drawback is the jail.
Yeah.
You get to run the jail, and that 20 is what it's built for, but I'm not sure how many they've got.
Yeah.
Again, I don't
Sure.
take part in day to day anymore.
I was just curious because that to me just sounds like a nightmare trying to manage that.
Well, it's a little bit easier in some respects now because we can house the vast majority of our inmates here in Pulaski.
Right.
In my day, most of our inmates were in Miller County, Phelps County, and some in the Dixon City Jail.
Mhm.
So we had to transport constantly. They don't have that problem
Right.
now. Now, they have the problem of right here.
Yeah.
You need jail
Is that right?
with a video monitor, and also the judge can come down there, and I've frequently seen the circuit judges down in the building
I'll be there.
to do the courtroom stuff right there. So
I need to get a tour. I got to go down there and see that place.
when it opened, Sheriff Bench took me under his wing and we toured it. And by the time it was over, I was almost crying because everything I had dreamed about having in a jail was right here in front of me.
We got our money's worth.
We got our money's
Well, that's
worth.
good.
Now, did it go over budget? I don't know if I can make that statement, but we got our money's worth. And in the long run, it probably will be okay. But right now, it is a major pain to pay the fee, I'm
Oh,
sure.
I wouldn't want that mortgage payment.
Yeah, well, it was kind of funny because they hadn't put the inmates in there yet. Jimmy was giving me a tour. We got behind one locked door, and oops, the other door was locked. This is basically a prison. When one door opens, the other one's locked. When that door locks behind you, then the other one will open. Well, the other one didn't open. Tells the control center open door.
Panic.
Yeah, but for about 20 seconds, we're locked in the jails together.
Wow.
It was good for a laugh at the time.
Well, I've had you for an hour. Now, the last option, I'm going to open the floor to you. You'd like to let anybody know what they don't know about you, or maybe if you got something else.
Down, but you have departed from some of those questions.
I derailed.
You derailed.
Conversation took a different course.
Gee, I wonder how that happens.
I
It
don't
happens
know.
quite frequently. So I guess the topic I would pick is one to address to the officers who are out there, not necessarily just police officer, military
Right.
will also work on this. You do either job and you do it for a while, you're going to see things you really did not want to see. You're going to hear sounds you really did not want to hear, and you're going to smell things that you really didn't want to smell. And if you do it for any length of time, you're going to get PTSD or whatever
Sure.
they're calling it these days. And one of your questions was, why do I write some of these books? And I've written 3 law enforcement related books: The True Murder, The Frozen Tears, and then my other 2, Tales from the Blue, are basically the type of stories you'd hear a group of veteran officers sitting around a room drinking
Mm-hmm.
beer going, hey, remember that squirrel we had that Saturday night that blah, blah, blah? Well, those are the kind of stories. But the reason I do it, one of them is to get a more realistic view of what police officers deal with out into the public perception, and at the same get it
Absolutely.
out.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody, your wife from college, your old high school public. Frozen Tears is the perfect case for me because it really affected me. I hadn't
Mhm.
been here very long. I was still relatively green in some sense of the word. And I've just walked into a triple murder by a federal cop. I mean,
Wow.
come on. And it really haunted me. And at first I was critical because my interview with the surviving victim roadside
Mm-hmm.
gave the military police command enough facts that they were able to zero in on the correct suspect driving the correct patrol car and start the manhunt for him.
Wow.
So at the time, that was extremely critical. And so I was very important for that hour.
Right.
But after that, yeah, but it made a definite impact. I
Mhm.
cried about that case for 40 years, and I'm not embarrassed to admit it. Well, in the summer of 2016, Beth Wiles from the Pulaski County Tourism Bureau asked me if I would do a presentation or whatever. They could, put something authentic in there,
Right.
for that touch of realism. And so, I can talk Civil War at the drop of a hat. Sure, I'll do it. Well, the first thing they came back with, what we need is bio. Well, my bio spells cop. And they came back immediately with, can he do a law enforcement session? Well, yeah, I can talk law enforcement at the drop of a hat. And so the first case I gave them was Johnny Lee Thornton and the Frozen Tears murder. And I'm not embarrassed to admit I broke down and cried in front of about
Right.
30 strangers and told them all about the case and told them this would make a hell of a book, but it's not one I could ever write because it gets to me.
Sure.
Well, as I'm giving this story, I see 2 little old ladies in the room, and both of them are scribbling down notes right and left. I'm thinking, those 2 are going to do something with this. Yeah, they did. They owned a publishing company together, and they both got a hold of my arms the next day and had them up behind my neck telling me, you will write a book for us on this, or else we're going to break both your arms. I cry about this case every time I think about it, so what's it going to hurt? But after 33 months of research, learning stuff about the case I didn't know, never heard of, and
Mm-hmm.
all the different angles that occurred with the feds, and talking to guys who worked the case on the federal side, I no longer cry about it.
Yeah.
I still get melancholy. It
Sure.
still depresses me, but I don't cry.
Yeah.
So writing the book was very cathartic for me. And so I would say the same thing to the guys out here who are suffering from PTSD. You don't necessarily have to write a book,
Right.
but for God's sakes, don't hold it in. Get it out. Cat, and it turns out to be a triple murder. I mean, I'll give you a funny story. Well, this is not really dispatch, but we had a citizen call in that we knew. Hey, I was in this abandoned house out here off 28, and boy, there's a foul smell in there. I think we go to turkey in the corner. Not expecting a homicide. You're prepared to investigate a homicide. Here's a dead turkey. Not expecting a homicide. You're prepared to investigate a homicide. Here's a dead turkey.
You never know what you're
You
going to get.
never know.
Well, I think that goes, whoa, here we go. Pretty much anything. Dana Blanar. I hope I got your name right. Pretty much anything.
I'll steal it from you. Sheriff's pension itself is in kind of a state of flux right now because a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that the funding mechanism that was in place for the sheriff's retirement was unconstitutional, and it got scrapped, leaving the sheriff's retirement fund with no money coming in. And they've been scrambling to replace that. They just passed some legislation. So I think we're to 40% of the sheriffs are wiped out to be vested in the
Right.
system, you have to be a minimum of 62 years of age and have a minimum of 8 years active service.
You have to make it through 2 elections
You got to go through 2 elections
and be 62.
and be 62.
That's
The elections is a whole nother story.
Okay, we're going to up the phone lines up. If anybody's got a question for JB King, numbers at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to give you a couple minutes while I say my thanks to the sponsors, especially Prue Law. Prue Law, find your books.
My books are there, all the
Amazon.
jbkingbooks.com, and you'll get it.
Okay, we'll put that link on there too. Here we go. Got a question. Can't see it up there, but it's from Dana Blanar. If you were sheriff today, would you be handling the death of fentanyl poisoning differently? Would you be investigating as homicides?
Well, I think I can tell you that they are investigating them as homicides. I will also tell you that's probably one of the toughest homicide cases you'll ever attempt to make. Of
Mhm.
elderly, but that's due to some physical problems I've got and the fact that I'm getting very long in the tooth and age-wise. So I can tell you that the cases are investigated, but making a case like that is really hard.
Yeah.
We made 1 or 2 while I was sheriff, but it's some of the toughest homicide work ever.
Because that would be Miss Blanar. Would that be the charges against the dealers? Is that correct? I'll wait for your response.
Anybody who supplies a
Right.
victim who dies.
They could be charged.
It primarily would be a dealer, but technically speaking, if you gave your best friend
So regardless of intent.
regardless of intent.
Oh wow.
Well, okay. And again, here we go.
But manslaughter versus this, that. that.
Intent when it comes to homicide.
Yeah.
Did you knowingly? Did you willfully? Was it an accidental? The charges can vary, but yeah, charges can be if you can prove it.
Sure.
But if in drug cases gets really, really tough.
Gotcha. Hope that answers your question, Ms. Blanar, and thank you so much for your questions. Anybody else got any questions? We've been. He's not lying. Board, you are. We may come down, do an on-site down at the farmer's market, and just shoot the stuff.
Well, farmers market's a great place to find some goodies.
That's it.
I'll tell you that.
You betcha. And with that, we're going to sign off. And depending any questions, well, thank you, everybody. And remember, thank you to the sponsors. And we're going to close with that real quick. The credits.